A quiet desert trip becomes something far darker when a millionaire and his mistress lead a pregnant woman to the edge of a Nevada cliff, and the mistress shoves her wheelchair into open air while the husband stands by and lets it happen. They think the fall will end everything. They think no one will ever know. But the woman they tried to erase lives climbs out of that ravine and begins a fight that will shake every lie they built. What follows is a battle between money and truth, between a man who believes he is untouchable and a mother who refuses to die before her child is born. And trust me, you will not see the moment she walks back into the spotlight until we get there together. Let us know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The late afternoon light stretched across Red Rock Canyon with a sharp desert clarity that made every shadow feel heavier than it should. Wind pushed against the sandstone towers and swept grains of red dust across the narrow overlook road. The air was dry enough to sting the throat, and the sky held the muted glow of the sun lowering toward the Nevada horizon. Evelyn Hart felt each change in the wind as if her body had become an instrument for sensing danger. She sat in her wheelchair at the edge of the overlook parking area, waiting for her husband to speak, waiting for some hint of kindness that might steady her trembling heart. None came. Grant Hart stood a few steps away with a stillness that felt forced. He had once held her hands in this same canyon and told her he wanted to build a future here. Now, he would not even meet her eyes. His expensive suit looked strange in the rugged desert landscape, like a man who did not belong and did not care to pretend otherwise. His silence pressed against Evelyn like another weight she was forced to carry. Beside him stood Marissa Lane. The younger woman looked completely comfortable, as if she were posing for a photograph rather than standing at the edge of a canyon with a pregnant wife. Her blonde hair caught the wind. Her lips curled into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Marissa had always been polished and confident in the way people who have never tasted hardship often are. Today, that confidence felt unnatural, too controlled, too rehearsed. Evelyn drew a careful breath and placed her hands over her stomach. At 6 months pregnant, she had learned to move slowly and with intention. Every motion reminded her of the tiny life turning gently inside her. The baby had become her source of courage on nights when pain shot through her legs from the old car accident. She remembered lying awake in the hospital after that crash, believing it was only an unfortunate coincidence. Today she questioned every memory she once accepted as truth. Grant finally turned to her. His face held no warmth. It was as if he were looking at someone he barely recognized. For a moment she wondered whether he regretted asking her to come here. She hoped he did. She hoped he felt even a fraction of the dread tightening in her chest. Evelyn forced herself to speak. "You said you wanted to talk," she said. Her voice quivered. "Why here? Why this place?" Marissa laughed softly. "Because it is poetic." Her tone held the sweetness of someone delivering a compliment, but her eyes glimmered with something malicious. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Grant thought it would help you understand that things are ending. So we chose this view." Evelyn felt her heart stutter. She had come hoping for reconciliation, or at least clarity. Instead, she found barbed words delivered by the woman who had been circling her marriage for months. She looked to Grant, searching for any sign that he would correct Marissa. He said nothing. His jaw tightened, and he looked away, facing the canyon as if the empty space ahead was easier to confront than his wife. Marissa moved closer to Evelyn and crouched slightly, so their eyes aligned. "You were never strong enough to keep a man like Grant," she whispered. "You dragged him down. You made him small. The world belongs to people who can keep up. That has never been you." Evelyn felt a wave of humiliation rise inside her, but she tightened her grip on the armrest of her wheelchair. She refused to let Marissa see her crumble. "I loved him," Evelyn said. "Love matters. Commitment matters." Marissa straightened and shook her head. "Those words are for women who have already lost." The wind picked up, and Evelyn shuddered. She looked at Grant again. "Please, say something. Why did you bring me here?" Grant's shoulders rose and fell with a long breath. He still did not meet her gaze. Before he could speak, Marissa stepped behind the wheelchair. Her heels clicked softly on the stone path. Evelyn felt a sudden pressure at the back of the chair, a subtle but unmistakable grip. Marissa leaned forward until her lips were near Evelyn's ear. "Because this is where your problems end," she whispered, with a smile that chilled Evelyn's blood. Evelyn's pulse hammered. She tried to turn her chair, but her weakened legs could not help her pivot. She grabbed at the wheels with shaking hands, but the terrain beneath her made movement difficult. Grant stood a few feet away, staring at the glowing canyon walls instead of his wife. His refusal to turn around felt like a verdict. Marissa tightened her hands on the chair. Grant's face twitched, but he did not intervene. He simply looked away, folding his arms as though bracing himself for the sound of something breaking. Terror surged through Evelyn. She placed her hands over her belly again. "Please, I am pregnant. Do not do this. The baby, please." For a brief moment, Marissa paused. Her expression softened as if she had considered those words. Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Then, the softness vanished. "You were always so dramatic," Marissa said. Before Evelyn could scream, Marissa shoved the wheelchair forward with a sudden, violent force. The world tilted. The canyon spun. Wind roared past Evelyn's ears. Her heart slammed against her ribs as gravity pulled her downward. She felt the baby kick, a desperate jolt of life inside her. She screamed for help, for mercy, for anything that might stop the inevitable. But there was only air, and the distant echo of Marissa's satisfied breath. The wheelchair struck the rocks first. Metal snapped and twisted. Evelyn felt a shock of pain explode through her body as she collided with the jagged ground. Darkness pulsed at the edges of her vision. She tasted blood. She tried to draw in a breath, but the agony in her ribs made it difficult. Somewhere above, she thought she heard footsteps retreating. Grant's voice was faint, strained, almost frightened. Then she heard Marissa say something she could not fully understand, followed by the sound of a car engine starting. Evelyn's eyes drifted closed. She clung to a single thought. The baby must live. Somehow, they must both live. High above, Grant and Marissa walked away from the edge of the cliff. They did not look back. They believed the desert had swallowed Evelyn Hart forever. But the canyon had not finished with her yet. The desert night settled over the canyon like a curtain of shadow, heavy and cold. Rain began to fall in uneven streaks, rare for Nevada but relentless when it came. The drops hit the jagged rocks at the bottom of the ravine, where Evelyn Hart lay motionless. Her body was twisted among the broken pieces of her wheelchair. Her breathing was faint, barely perceptible against the roar of distant thunder. Blood streaked the dust around her. Her hands were curled against her abdomen, as if trying to shield the fragile life inside her. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the canyon walls. For one brief moment, her torn clothing and bruised skin glowed pale against the red stone. The next moment, darkness returned, swallowing the shape of her broken body. Above her, rain pooled along the cliffs and spilled in thin streams, soaking her hair and chilling her to the bone. She did not move. She could not move. Yet the smallest rise and fall of her chest proved that she was still alive. At the same time, several miles away, Jonah Miller drove along a narrow dirt road in his pickup truck. He had volunteered for evening patrols since leaving his job as a mountain rescue medic years earlier. He found a sense of calm in watching over the land at night, especially during storms. Tonight, however, something in the air unsettled him. The storm felt too sharp, too sudden. His headlights carved through the sheets of rain, revealing scattered branches and shifting sand. As he approached a bend in the road, a flicker of silver caught his attention. Jonah slowed the truck. The reflection came again, faint but unmistakable. He stopped, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out into the cold night. Rain soaked his jacket instantly, but he barely noticed. He scanned the canyon floor until the beam of light landed on a twisted metal frame. It was a wheelchair, broken, bent nearly in half. Jonah's stomach tightened. Wheelchairs did not simply end up in ravines by accident. He climbed down the slope carefully, gripping the wet rocks as he descended. When he reached the bottom, he swung the flashlight in a wide arc. The beam passed over a scattering of glass, torn fabric, and then stopped on the still figure lying near the rocks. He moved quickly toward her. When he knelt beside her, the first thing he noticed was how cold she felt. Her skin was pale and slick with rain. He checked her pulse. It was weak, but it was there. Relief washed through him for a moment before he saw the outline of her pregnant belly beneath her soaked shirt. He froze, realizing the stakes were higher than he first assumed. Storms, injuries, hypothermia, and now a baby. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her shaking body, then leaned close to listen. At first, he could only hear the rain beating against the rocks, but then he caught the fragile rhythm of a fetal heartbeat. It was faint, but steady enough to hold on to. He pressed his lips together and whispered, "Hold on, both of you." Jonah slid one arm under her back and another beneath her legs, lifting her carefully. She let out a soft groan, a sound so faint it almost disappeared into the storm. Her head fell against his chest as he carried her up the slope. The mud made each step dangerous, but Jonah pushed upward with the focus of a man who had saved lives in far worse conditions. By the time he reached the truck, he was soaked and shaking, but he moved with practiced precision. He laid her across the seat, covered her with blankets, and turned the heater on full. As he drove toward the small town 15 miles away, he grabbed his phone and called the on-call doctor. "I found a woman in the ravine. She is injured and pregnant. Breathing is shallow. I am bringing her in." He listened to the instructions, his eyes constantly darting toward her motionless form. The baby kicked once beneath her ribs. Jonah heard her whisper something. "Do not let them find me." Her voice cracked, as if every word cost her strength she could not spare. Jonah leaned toward her. Who are you talking about?" But she had already slipped back into unconsciousness. Rain slammed against the windshield as he sped toward the town. He considered heading directly to the clinic, but decided against it. She was too unstable. If someone truly wanted to find her, he could not risk a public place. Instead, he turned toward his cabin, near the edge of the pine forest. He kept medical supplies there, a habit he never abandoned after leaving rescue work. When he arrived, he carried her inside and placed her on the bed by the fireplace. He lit the fire quickly, the orange glow reflecting off her pale skin. He cleaned the cuts on her arms and face, disinfected the wounds, and wrapped them carefully. Some of the bruises looked fresh. Others looked older. He noticed that she flinched even in unconsciousness, as if her body remembered pain too vividly. Jonah used a small, portable Doppler to check the fetal heartbeat again. The sound was soft, but present. He let out a breath he had been holding for too long. "You are safe," he murmured, "both of you." An hour later, as the fire warmed the room, Evelyn stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, clouded with fear and confusion. She lifted her head slightly, winced in pain, and looked around the unfamiliar cabin. The flickering firelight cast shadows across the wooden walls. Rain hammered against the roof. Her breath began to quicken. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice thin and trembling. Jonah pulled a chair closer. "You are safe. No one will find you here. I promise." Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. She pressed a shaking hand to her stomach, as if confirming the child was still there. Jonah watched her carefully. He saw fear, exhaustion, and something deeper. She was not simply hurt, she had been targeted. He knew that look. He had seen it before in people running from something they could not face alone. "You are going to be all right," he said softly. "I will help you until you are strong enough to tell me what happened." Evelyn's tears fell harder at that. She closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness of a stranger after the cruelty she had endured. The fire cracked beside them. Rain softened against the windows. Within minutes, she slipped back into sleep, her breathing steadier than before. Jonah watched her for a long time, listening to the rhythm of the storm. He realized that whatever had happened to her tonight was no accident, and whoever had left her in that canyon might come looking. But not tonight. Tonight she was safe. And for the first time since falling from the cliff, Evelyn Hart drifted into rest with a fragile but growing sense of hope. Morning light crept slowly across the Nevada desert, casting long, pale bands of gold over the canyon ridges. The world looked quiet and untouched, as if it had not witnessed a violent act the night before. Yet miles away, the chaos was already unfolding. Grant Hart stood before reporters with a look of carefully measured sorrow. Cameras recorded every blink, every quiver of his mouth, every time he lowered his eyes as if grief weighed down his entire body. He told the police that his wife had gone for a walk near the cliff and never returned. He said he feared she had slipped. His voice cracked at all the right moments. To the untrained eye, he appeared to be a devastated husband begging for help. To Marissa Lane, who watched from the side, the performance was almost amusing. She held one hand over her mouth in a gesture of shock, but her eyes sparkled with a triumph only she understood. The fact that no one recognized that spark made her even more self-assured. She did not worry. The desert was unforgiving. People did not survive falls like the one she had delivered. She believed the world would soon move on. The police combed the overlook area throughout the morning. They found the shattered remains of a wheelchair at the bottom of the ravine. The wheels were bent inward. The metal frame was cracked and twisted. The seat had torn away entirely. It was clear the fall had been catastrophic. However, no body was found. Officers studied the rocks and the narrow ledges, searching for any sign of Evelyn Hart, but the canyon kept its silence. They assumed the worst. Reporters began writing headlines, calling the situation a tragic mystery. One local station described it as a heartbreaking accident involving a pregnant woman who never made it home. While the world built its own narrative, Evelyn slowly began to wake in Jonah Miller's cabin. Pain struck her the moment consciousness returned. It crawled across her ribs, through her back, and deep into her legs. She gasped as the memory of falling rushed back to her. The room spun. She tried to sit up, but collapsed against the pillow with a cry. Jonah was at her side in an instant. His expression softened. He placed a warm compress against her lower back and lifted a glass of water to her lips. "Drink slowly," he said. "You have been through a lot. You are safe here." The water soothed her dry throat. She took careful breaths, letting the warmth of the compress loosen the tight muscles along her spine. When her pulse finally steadied, Evelyn closed her eyes and tried to summon the courage to speak. Jonah waited without pressuring her. His calm presence filled the cabin like a weighted blanket that kept panic from rising. "My husband and I," she began quietly, "had a marriage built on money and control. It took years for me to see it." Jonah did not interrupt. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. His eyes held no judgment, only concern. Evelyn continued. She explained how Grant had always made her feel small, how he had isolated her from old friends, how he had belittled her for minor decisions, how he had dismissed her fears. Then she spoke about the car crash that had injured her legs months earlier. She had always believed it was a tragic accident. Now, as she lay in Jonah's cabin, the truth formed in her mind with horrifying clarity. "I do not think it was an accident," she whispered. "Not anymore?" Jonah inhaled sharply, but he stayed silent, giving her room to speak. "He used to say, 'I was a burden,'" she said. "He said, 'I made him weaker.' And Marissa, she made sure I knew she wanted me gone." Her voice trembled. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I knew they were cruel, but I never thought they would." Her breath caught. "I never thought they would push me to my death." Jonah's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked away, trying to control the anger that surged through him. Hearing her speak with such pain made something shift inside him. He had rescued many people in his life, but this felt different. This felt personal. "You need to report this to the police," he said. "What happened to you cannot be ignored." Evelyn shook her head quickly. Her eyes widened with panic. "No, you do not understand who Grant is. He has money, influence, connections. They will believe him. They always have. If I go to them now, without proof, he will finish what he started." Jonah heard the fear in her voice and recognized it as the fear of someone who had lived under control for too long. He softened his tone. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Hide me," she whispered. "Please. At least until I know how to prove the truth. I cannot let them find me." Jonah hesitated. He knew the risk, but he also knew he could not abandon her. The strength in her voice, even broken and fragile, stirred something protective within him. "All right," he said. "I will keep your secret, but we will make sure you get medical care and watch your pregnancy closely." Evelyn nodded gratefully. Her eyes glistened as she looked at him. "Thank you. I mean it. Thank you." In that moment, Jonah realized that despite the bruises on her skin and the fear in her voice, there was a quiet power inside her. She was not as fragile as she appeared. Elsewhere, the news of her disappearance spread across the region. Neighbors, co-workers, and strangers discussed the mystery on social media. Headlines speculated about what could have happened. Talk shows debated whether she had wandered off or suffered a tragic accident. Police authorities emphasized that the investigation was ongoing. Reporters replayed Grant's dramatic interview repeatedly, portraying him as a grieving husband desperate for answers. Back in the cabin, Evelyn listened to the faint hum of the heater and the slow crackle of the fire. She felt the weight of her situation settle on her chest. If she revealed herself too soon, Grant would find her. She knew him too well. He would not allow loose ends. He would not allow her to speak. She placed a protective hand over her stomach. The baby moved gently beneath her fingertips. It was a reminder that she was not fighting for herself alone. She was fighting for her child. Jonah sat across from her, studying her expression with quiet understanding. He sensed the determination growing behind her fear. She was a woman who had been pushed to the brink and refused to fall. Evelyn let out a shaky breath. "He will try to kill me again if he knows I survived." Jonah nodded. "Then he cannot know. Not yet." And in that cabin, with the storm easing outside and the scent of pine drifting through the air, Evelyn understood the truth. She had survived the impossible, but survival was only the beginning. The following morning, the storm had passed, leaving the Nevada desert washed clean and pale beneath the rising sun. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of wet stone and pine from the nearby forest. Inside Jonah's cabin, Evelyn sat propped against a pillow, breathing slowly as she prepared herself for the next step in her healing. Jonah entered the room with a warm jacket and said gently that they needed to visit a doctor he trusted. He explained that the clinic was small and the staff respected privacy. Evelyn hesitated, but the soft flutter in her belly reminded her she was not alone. She finally nodded. The drive into town was quiet. Jonah kept glancing toward her, worried she might pass out from the pain. When they arrived, he helped her inside through a back entrance to avoid attention. The obstetrician, a calm woman with gentle hands, examined Evelyn with great care. The room fell silent as the doctor listened for the baby's heartbeat. The faint, rhythmic sound filled the space. Evelyn closed her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks. The doctor confirmed that the child was alive and growing. However, she added firmly that Evelyn needed absolute rest. Her body had survived an incredible trauma and could not endure additional strain. Relief washed through Evelyn so completely that she began to sob. Jonah placed a supportive hand on her shoulder as the doctor explained a plan for recovery. Evelyn whispered her gratitude. The fear of losing her child had haunted every breath since the fall. Hearing the tiny heartbeat gave her a reason to move forward. When they returned to the cabin, Jonah began transforming one of the spare rooms into a private resting space for her. He brought in blankets, a softer mattress, fresh pillows, and placed a lamp beside the bed. He made sure she had water, prenatal vitamins, and a bell she could ring if she needed help. The care he showed surprised her. She had forgotten what it felt like to be treated with gentleness. Over the next several days, Evelyn attempted to rebuild her strength. She struggled to move without pain. Her legs trembled with every shift of weight, but she forced herself to try. Jonah taught her how to use a pair of lightweight crutches. She hated how slow she felt and how fiercely her muscles protested, but she refused to give up. She inched forward little by little. Jonah stayed close, always ready to steady her, always patient. Evenings became moments of peace. Jonah cooked simple meals, often soups or warm bread with vegetables. They ate at the small wooden table by the window where the forest stretched beyond the glass in soft green waves. Evelyn found comfort in the routine. She began to feel safe there, tucked away from a world that believed she no longer existed. Still, nightmares visited her at night. She would jolt awake, gasping, seeing again the moment Marissa's hands shoved the chair forward. She felt the free fall. She heard the rush of wind. Each time she woke, shaking, clutching her stomach in panic. Jonah would come to the doorway, sit beside her, and speak softly until her breathing slowed. "You are alive. You survived. You already won." His steady voice pushed back the fear. As her strength slowly returned, Evelyn began documenting everything that had happened. She wrote down dates, memories, fragments of conversations, and details she once tried to ignore. She wrote about the fall. She wrote about the old car accident that now seemed suspicious. She wrote about the way Grant had monitored her spending, her movements, and her friendships. She wrote about Marissa's taunting words and the coldness in her husband's eyes. She gathered anything that could one day become evidence. Jonah noticed her determination and offered to help. He brought his old laptop and several devices he had used in search and rescue work. Together, they accessed her old email account. They sifted through messages that Grant had hidden or deleted from her phone. Evelyn discovered financial documents she had never seen before: bank transfers, password-protected files, receipts from luxury purchases she had not made. Each discovery placed new weight on her shoulders. Then they found it. A large transfer made on the night of the fall. It went to an account connected to a private contractor in Las Vegas. The description was vague, but the timing was undeniable. Jonah leaned back in his chair with a grim expression. This was not a crime of passion. This was planned. Evelyn stared at the screen, her throat tight. She had always hoped that at least part of her marriage had been built on truth. Now she saw that Grant had been preparing her disappearance long before she realized he wanted her gone. The pain of that realization cut deeper than the bruises still healing across her ribs. Later that evening, Jonah sat with her on the porch as the sky darkened. He told her gently that she needed to think beyond anger. He reminded her that her child would need her stability and courage in the future. Revenge would not build the life she deserved. Justice would. Evelyn wiped her tears and nodded. I am not looking for violence. I am looking for the truth to come out. I want to live in a world where he cannot hurt us again. Her voice was steady despite the fear underneath. Jonah looked at her with a respect he had not shown many people. You are stronger than you think, he said. She lowered her gaze, embarrassed and grateful, feeling for the first time in a long while that someone saw her as more than a burden. As the days passed, Evelyn continued her exercises. Her steps became more stable. Her hands trembled less when she lifted herself from the bed. Each improvement, no matter how small, renewed her confidence. She realized she was reclaiming pieces of herself that Grant had taken away long before the fall. Yet she knew the moment she feared was still coming. The moment when she would have to face the world again. When she would have to face Grant. When silence would no longer protect her. She looked out the window at the mountains. Their immovable presence reminded her that strength was not the absence of pain, but the willingness to rise despite it. And she knew that day was approaching. She could feel it in the steady heartbeat beneath her hand and in the growing fire within her chest. Las Vegas shimmered under the late afternoon sun, its neon signs flickering to life long before darkness arrived. In the center of the city, a grand memorial service was being prepared inside one of the most prestigious hotel ballrooms. The chandeliers glowed with golden light. Rows of white chairs lined the floor. A large framed photo of Evelyn Hart stood at the front, surrounded by lilies. Soft instrumental music played over the speakers, creating an atmosphere of grief that felt heavily choreographed. Grant Hart stood near the podium, practicing the expression he would use when he stepped before the cameras. Guests filtered in. Members of the press took their positions. Cameras flashed frequently, capturing Grant's solemn posture. Commentators whispered that he looked like a man whose entire world had been shattered. He kept his hands clasped tightly, his gaze lowered, as if preparing for a funeral rather than a staged performance. Reporters from several networks spoke respectfully about a tragic disappearance and the heartbreak of a husband who refused to give up hope. Standing only a step away from him, Marissa Lane radiated pride. She wore a fitted black dress and a sympathetic smile, but her eyes betrayed her satisfaction. She observed the crowd with the air of someone who believed she had won. She leaned toward Grant once and whispered something, prompting him to nod slightly. When cameras were directed at her, she adopted a sorrowful expression that disappeared the moment attention drifted elsewhere. As the ceremony began, a reporter from a regional news station raised his hand. He asked why the search had not yielded a body, and whether investigators had suggested foul play. The question made Grant's composure falter. He shifted his weight and cleared his throat, offering a vague response about trusting the authorities. He deflected skillfully, but the moment revealed a small crack in the image he had constructed. Meanwhile, a growing number of officers were beginning to voice concern about the absence of a body. The discovery of the shattered wheelchair had deepened the mystery rather than resolved it. The canyon was unforgiving, yet bodies were rarely lost completely. As days passed, their unease grew. Grant maintained his grieving husband persona, but every time he rehearsed sorrow in front of the mirror, fear flickered at the edges of his confidence. Without a body, there was always room for doubt. And doubt was dangerous. During the memorial, one guest whispered that Evelyn had been a gentle woman who did not deserve to vanish this way. Another remarked that Grant was holding up remarkably well for someone experiencing such a loss. Each comment made Marissa smile. She moved closer to Grant and murmured, "She is gone. Completely. You need to stop worrying." Grant kept his eyes on the floor as he whispered back, "Pray that you are right." While the city mourned a woman they believed lost forever, Evelyn sat in Jonah's cabin, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the television that displayed the fabricated ceremony. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw her own face decorated with flowers, as if she were already buried. Tears spilled down her cheeks, as much from shock as from heartbreak. She pressed her hand to her chest and tried to steady her breathing. Seeing the world treat her as dead filled her with a complex ache she could not describe. Jonah entered the room, saw the screen, and immediately reached for the remote. He turned off the television and crouched beside her. "One day," he said gently, "they will be forced to face the truth." The words carried a quiet strength that Evelyn clung to. She wiped her eyes, feeling the sting of betrayal more sharply than ever. Grant was not only willing to kill her, he was willing to celebrate her death for public admiration. She inhaled shakily as the baby shifted inside her. "The world believes him because he is rich," she whispered. "He knows how to make people see what he wants them to see. No one knows I am alive." Jonah rested a hand on her shoulder. "But someone will believe you. We only need one person with the power to help." The idea lingered in Evelyn's thoughts. She had spent so much time trying to forget the world she came from that she had nearly forgotten the few people who once cared for her. Slowly, an image formed in her mind, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice. A woman who had helped her years ago with complicated financial questions. A retired attorney named Patricia Meyer. Patricia had moved to Reno after stepping away from her legal career. She had always treated Evelyn with respect, unlike many people in Grant's social circles. Evelyn whispered her name aloud, and Jonah nodded in approval. "Contact her. She could help us find the right direction." It took several hours for Evelyn to gather her courage. She used Jonah's phone to send a discreet message requesting a private meeting. She did not include details, only that she needed help urgently and could not explain over text. The response came faster than expected. Patricia agreed to meet her at a small cabin on the outskirts of Reno. The next day, Jonah drove Evelyn to the location. They arrived early. Evelyn fidgeted with her sleeves, terrified that Patricia would not believe her story or would refuse to get involved. When Patricia finally stepped inside, her eyes widened. She gasped, covered her mouth, and immediately burst into tears. "Evelyn, my God, they said you were gone." Evelyn stood on trembling legs and allowed Patricia to embrace her. The older woman's hands shook as she touched Evelyn's face, confirming she was real. When they sat down, Evelyn recounted every moment of her ordeal, describing the fall, the betrayal, the escape, and the recovery. Patricia listened without interrupting, though her expression darkened with every detail. "No one has the right to take the life of a pregnant woman," Patricia said at last. "I will help you. I will not let them get away with this." The promise settled into Evelyn's heart like a stone of hope. She handed Patricia the folder containing the evidence she had gathered. Emails, financial records, notes. Patricia accepted the documents with a solemn nod and tucked them away safely. On the drive back, the baby kicked softly. Evelyn placed her hand over her abdomen and felt the reassurance of life pressing against her palm. It was a reminder that she had survived for a reason. She whispered quietly, "Mama is coming back." but she will not be the same woman she was before." And Jonah, hearing the words, glanced at her with a look that understood everything without needing to say a thing. The morning sun filtered softly through the pine branches outside Jonah's cabin as Evelyn stood beside the wooden railing, gripping it with both hands. Her breath trembled slightly as she positioned her feet. Jonah adjusted the new walking frame he had purchased and placed it in front of her with quiet encouragement. She nodded, determined, and eased her weight forward. The metal frame steadied her as she attempted her first step of the day. Her legs wobbled. Pain surged through her lower back, but she did not give up. She lifted her foot again and moved it several inches, then again. When her knees buckled, she caught herself. When exhaustion hit her chest, she stopped to breathe, then continued. Jonah stood within arm's reach, ready to catch her if she fell, but he did not interfere unless necessary. He saw the strength in her eyes and knew she needed to feel ownership of each victory. Despite her effort, she collapsed twice before noon. The first fall left her with scraped palms. The second left her breathless as she clung to the frame, gasping with frustration. But each time she pushed herself upright, her resolve growing stronger. Jonah watched closely, and something shifted in his gaze. The pity he once felt had turned into deep admiration. He saw not a broken woman, but a survivor fighting her way back piece by piece. When she finally rested, Evelyn wiped her brow and whispered that she did not want Jonah caught in the crossfire of her past. Her voice cracked as she spoke. She said Grant was dangerous. She said his reach was long. She said the safest thing for Jonah would be to walk away. Jonah stepped closer, shaking his head with a steady calm. "You and the baby are why I am still here," he said. "That is all that matters." His sincerity made her eyes glisten. She felt gratitude blooming inside her, but she forced herself to keep her emotions in check. She could not allow her heart to confuse kindness with something deeper. Not yet, not while her life was still fragile and uncertain. As the days passed, Evelyn dedicated more and more time to working with Patricia Meyer. She sat at the cabin table with stacks of papers, her pen moving steadily as she documented everything she remembered. She looked through old financial statements, rechecked email logs, and revisited old conversations that once seemed meaningless. Patricia spoke with her over secure calls, guiding her through the process of gathering evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny. Patricia's investigation expanded quickly. She followed the trail of money Grant had been moving for months. She studied his bank transfers and business records. One transaction caught her attention. It was labeled as a confidential payment, large enough to raise suspicion, and it was made on the exact night Evelyn was pushed off the cliff. Patricia sent the details to Evelyn. Seeing the numbers on the screen made Evelyn's stomach twist. It was proof, painful proof. Grant had not acted out of impulse. He had planned her disappearance. The realization ignited something inside her. Rage burned through her, but it did not consume her. She held it tightly, refusing to let it dictate her actions. She had learned too much about fear to let anger cloud her judgment now. She breathed deeply, hand pressed to her stomach, absorbing the truth without letting it overpower her. News from the outside world kept slipping into Jonah's cabin. Police announced that the search had ended with no sighting of Evelyn's body. The statement, intended as a formal conclusion, unsettled the public and law enforcement alike. The canyon had many dangers, but even in the harshest terrain, remains were usually found. Officers admitted quietly that the absence of a body raised questions they could not yet answer. Grant, however, did not find comfort in the announcement. His carefully built narrative relied on the world believing Evelyn had died in a tragic accident. Now, each day without a body intensified his anxiety. He grew restless. He paced at night. He drank more than usual. Marissa saw this and suggested they leave Nevada for a while, maybe travel abroad. She believed distance would ease suspicion. She believed disappearing temporarily would give them control. But Grant refused. Running would make him look guilty. He snapped at Marissa for even suggesting it. His fear was becoming uncontrollable, and Marissa could see cracks forming in his confidence. She felt unease creeping into her spine. If he broke under pressure, he might take her down with him. The partnership she once thought empowered her was beginning to feel like a trap. Back in the cabin, Jonah advised Evelyn to prepare for the moment she would reappear publicly. He knew this confrontation was inevitable. He told her that her strength was nearly restored and that she had gathered enough evidence to support her claims. She nodded. She understood. She had been building toward that moment with every step, every bruise, every breath, since Jonah pulled her from the ravine. Evelyn made a decision. She would return when she had the strongest evidence possible, when the truth was undeniable, when Grant and Marissa could no longer twist her story into something convenient. She would come back, not as the woman they tried to eliminate, but as someone reborn by the force of her own will. Jonah promised to stand beside her. "Whatever happens," he said, "wherever this leads, I will not leave you." The promise settled warmly into her chest. She placed her hand over her stomach and whispered to her child, "You are the reason I am alive." The baby responded with a gentle kick, as if offering reassurance. Evelyn smiled, pressing her hand more firmly against the small movement. She felt strength returning not only to her body, but also to her spirit. The fear that once controlled her was fading. In its place rose something fierce and steady, something that felt like destiny. She looked out the cabin window at the distant mountains. They stood tall and unyielding, carved by storms yet never broken. She understood them now. It was time to rise, time to fight, time to become the woman she was always meant to be. A warrior shaped not by hatred, but by the unshakable fire of a mother's love. The days lengthened as summer settled over Nevada, and with each new sunrise, Evelyn felt the air shift around her. The world outside Jonah's cabin was beginning to move in her favor. It started when Patricia Meyer contacted her with a firm voice and an energy that told Evelyn something significant had happened. Patricia had located the former housekeeper who once worked for the Hart estate, a woman who had watched far more than she ever dared speak about. The housekeeper agreed to give a private statement. When Patricia sat across from her in a rented room in Reno, the older woman's hands trembled. She admitted that she had overheard Grant and Marissa arguing months earlier about how to handle Evelyn. They did not know she was in the hallway. She recalled Marissa's voice, sharp and impatient, saying Evelyn was becoming a problem they could not ignore. Grant responded with a chilling quiet that suggested he had already made a decision. The memory had haunted the housekeeper, and she cried as she explained that guilt had forced her to come forward. Patricia recorded the statement with meticulous care. The details added fuel to the investigation she was building. She knew she needed more. She contacted a private investigator in Las Vegas, a man with decades of experience tracking digital footprints and physical movements. She sent him every piece of information she had uncovered. Within a week, he called her back, speaking in a steady voice that revealed both professionalism and surprise. He had located traffic camera footage from the night Evelyn fell. It clearly showed Grant and Marissa leaving the cliff area together. Neither appeared distressed. They were calm. Too calm. The footage chilled Patricia to her core. She replayed it several times, unable to believe the composure on their faces after what they had done. She forwarded the files to Evelyn with a warning that the images might be difficult to see. Evelyn watched them in Jonah's cabin while holding her breath. She saw Grant's expressionless face, illuminated by the headlights. She saw Marissa's satisfied smirk as she adjusted her hair. The casual nature of their departure made Evelyn's skin crawl. Patricia vowed to shield Evelyn as fiercely as she would protect her own child. She understood the danger Evelyn faced and the courage it took to come forward. Her messages grew more frequent, filled with updates and reassurances. Every word felt like a lifeline to Evelyn, a reminder that she was no longer fighting alone. At the same time, Evelyn could feel another force supporting her. Jonah had become her anchor. He checked in constantly, with quiet sayings that strengthened her spirit. He cooked for her when she forgot to eat. He listened when she needed to talk. He stood back when she needed space. His presence steadied her and reminded her that healing was not only a physical process, but an emotional one too. The fire inside her heart grew brighter each time she saw the faith in his eyes. Her body also continued to recover. Each morning, she walked across the small porch outside the cabin without crutches. Her steps were slow but steady. When she reached the end, she often looked up at the mountains, feeling as if they were rising with her. By the third week, she was strong enough to climb the first few steps leading to the cabin's upper loft. Jonah watched from a safe distance and clapped softly when she reached the top. She laughed for the first time in weeks. During a follow-up appointment, the doctor confirmed what Evelyn needed to hear most. The baby was developing beautifully. The heartbeat was strong and clear. The doctor smiled warmly and said that Evelyn's resilience had given the child an incredible chance. Evelyn pressed a hand to her stomach, overwhelmed with gratitude. Every movement from the baby reminded her of why she was still fighting. It grounded her in the present and strengthened her hope for the future. Meanwhile, the outside world was unraveling for Grant Hart. He no longer slept through the night. He paced through his mansion, replaying possibilities in his mind, drinking glass after glass of whiskey until the bottle ran dry. He snapped at his staff. He locked himself in his office. He went through Marissa's phone without permission, convinced she was talking to someone. His fear became a shadow that followed him from room to room. Marissa felt the shift as well. She watched Grant with unease. She began sensing danger in his behavior. She wondered if he suspected that she had kept some details hidden from him. The memory of pushing Evelyn haunted her in ways she did not expect. She began to think about leaving Nevada entirely. She imagined boarding a plane, starting fresh somewhere else. She even researched flights in secret, but Grant intercepted her once. When she tried to slip her phone into her purse, he confronted her with narrowed eyes. He accused her of planning to betray him. The tension between them grew unbearable. Marissa felt trapped, just as Evelyn once had. Her ambition had led her to this nightmare, and now she realized the man she thought she controlled might destroy her before she could escape. Back in the cabin, Evelyn watched news segments about Grant's public appearances. He looked thinner, paler. The confident facade he once maintained was cracking under the weight of his guilt. Evelyn recognized the haunted look in his eyes. It was not remorse, it was fear. She understood that even if the courts had not yet caught him, his conscience had. And that slow unraveling was its own form of punishment. One evening, as they sat outside, Jonah rested a hand on the rail and looked at her with quiet pride. "Justice is a long road," he said, "but you are walking in the right direction." Evelyn nodded. She felt the truth of his words deep in her chest. She touched the broken wheelchair frame Jonah had saved after rescuing her. It sat in the corner of the porch, bent and rusted, a reminder of both her suffering and her survival. She ran her fingers along the twisted metal. It symbolized everything she had endured, every fear she had conquered, and every breath she refused to give up. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I will return." She did not say it with rage or trembling. She said it with certainty. She said it with the strength of someone who had risen from the edge of death and stood tall again. She said it as a woman who had reclaimed her life. She looked at the distant lights of the city and felt the future calling. And she was finally ready to answer. The morning of the event began with a stillness that felt almost ceremonial. In the quiet of Jonah's cabin, Evelyn stood before the mirror, adjusting the simple white dress that Patricia had insisted she wear. It was modest, soft, and unadorned, yet the way it draped over her shoulders made her look almost luminous. Her pregnancy showed clearly now. The life growing inside her rounded her silhouette and strengthened her posture. She let one hand rest gently over her stomach. She was nervous, but she was ready. Patricia had planned every detail with meticulous precision. She had chosen this day because Grant Hart would be unveiling his newest real estate project at a luxury venue in Las Vegas. The event was televised nationally. Politicians, investors, and journalists from major networks would be in attendance. The timing offered something Evelyn needed more than anything else. Witnesses, hundreds of them. Cameras that could not be bribed. Lenses that would record everything the moment she stepped into view. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Jonah approached her with a warm steadiness that grounded her. He checked the seating arrangement in the car and ensured she had water, identification, and copies of the evidence Patricia carried in her briefcase. He stood behind her for a long moment, not touching her, but offering a quiet reassurance with his presence. "When you walk in there," he said, his voice low and steady, "I will be right behind you. Nothing will happen to you today." Evelyn nodded. She drew a breath that felt like the first full breath she had taken since the fall. This was the day she rose again. The drive into Las Vegas was surreal. The city's shimmering buildings rose against the heat haze as if they belonged to a world she no longer recognized. Billboards flickered with advertisements for musicals, restaurants, and luxury hotels. Crowds filled the sidewalks. No one knew that the woman sitting in the back seat of Jonah's truck was the same woman they had seen on the news as missing and presumed dead. Evelyn watched the world rush by and felt the weight of all that had been taken from her. Today, she would take something back. The event hall buzzed with anticipation. Guests in tailored suits and shimmering gowns moved through the entryway. Cameramen adjusted their equipment. Microphones were tested. Reporters rehearsed lines for live broadcasts. When Grant finally appeared on stage, the room quieted immediately. He wore a dark suit, and his expression mimicked stoic grief. He reached for the microphone with a practiced solemnity, ready to sell another lie to the world. Standing just outside the doors, Evelyn steadied herself. Her heart hammered, but not from fear, from purpose. Jonah placed a supportive hand on her shoulder for a brief second. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "More ready than I have ever been." Inside the hall, Grant had just begun his speech, thanking the crowd for their support during a difficult time in his life. His voice trembled at the edges, carefully calculated. Reporters leaned forward to capture every word. Investors nodded respectfully. Marissa stood off stage, wearing a sparkling dress and the same confident smile she always wore when she believed she had won. Then the doors opened. People turned toward the sound. A wave of whispers rippled across the room. Journalists lowered their cameras, stunned. Several guests gasped. One woman covered her mouth with shaking hands. The whispers grew into a rising murmur. "That is her. She is alive. That is Evelyn Hart." Evelyn stepped into the light with her shoulders straight and her chin lifted. The white dress glowed under the overhead spotlights. Her baby bump was unmistakable. Her steps were steady, each one measured and firm. She looked like a woman who had walked through death and returned stronger. Grant froze. His hand slipped from the microphone. It clattered loudly on the stage floor, echoing through the silent hall. His face drained of color. His eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat. For the first time since she met him, Evelyn saw fear that he could not disguise. Marissa's reaction was even more dramatic. She stumbled backward, gripping a nearby chair for support. Her knees buckled. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Evelyn as if seeing a ghost rising from the grave. Evelyn moved to the center aisle with Jonah quietly walking behind her. When she reached the front of the room, she looked directly at Grant. Then she spoke, her voice calm and unwavering. "I did not die. I was not lost. I was pushed from that cliff. I survived." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters surged forward with microphones raised. Guests shouted questions. Cameras clicked wildly. Security officers rushed toward the commotion. Patricia strode confidently toward the police officers stationed near the stage and handed over a heavy file folder filled with evidence. She spoke firmly, making sure every word was recorded. These documents prove premeditated, attempted murder. Grant reacted by instinct. He stepped backward, then turned sharply and attempted to run toward the exit behind the stage. Several officers lunged forward and intercepted him before he could flee. They restrained him as he protested through clenched teeth and frantic breaths. His struggle only made his guilt more visible. Marissa did not run. She seemed paralyzed. When officers approached her with handcuffs, she shook her head in disbelief. No, this is not happening." But the officers read her rights clearly. They placed her in cuffs as cameras zoomed in. She was arrested for being the direct perpetrator who pushed Evelyn off the cliff and was charged with first-degree attempted murder. Grant was secured next, arrested as the mastermind and accomplice. His downcast eyes flicked toward Evelyn, and for the first time, he saw a woman he could not control. Evelyn watched silently. She did not smile. She did not speak again until a reporter asked her what she wanted to say now that the truth had come out. She placed her hand over her belly and said, "My child deserves to know that his mother did not give up. That is why I am here." Across the hall, People were moved to tears. Many older attendees pressed tissues to their cheeks. The courage of a pregnant woman standing against her attempted killers touched them deeply. By evening, social media filled with clips of her entrance. Thousands called her the woman who rose again. Survivors of abuse commented that her strength gave them hope. The nation watched as Evelyn walked back out of the hall, escorted by Jonah. As they left for the quiet safety of the cabin, Evelyn understood something profound. Justice had finally begun, but the road ahead was far from over. The courthouse in downtown Las Vegas had seen its share of high-profile cases, but nothing had prepared the city for the trial of Grant Hart and Marissa Lane. Reporters camped outside in long rows. Satellite trucks lined the sidewalks. Every major network had secured a front-row broadcast position. Inside the detention facility, Grant and Marissa waited in separate holding cells, both scheduled for transfer to the courtroom at dawn. The air inside the jail felt heavy. The public had learned that Evelyn Hart was alive, and the shock had rippled across the country with overwhelming force. When the judge approved an emergency trial docket, crowds surged toward the courthouse. People lined up before sunrise, some wrapped in blankets, many carrying signs supporting Evelyn. Most were older Americans who felt personally connected to her struggle. They spoke about their daughters, their sisters, their granddaughters. They said Evelyn represented every woman who had been silenced or underestimated. Grant was escorted into the courtroom first. His appearance stunned the audience. His suit hung loosely on his frame. His eyes were hollow and bloodshot. The confident real estate mogul who once commanded every room now moved like a man whose spirit had cracked. He kept his head down as cameras flashed, unable to look at the spectators who whispered about him. When he took his seat beside his attorney, he wrung his hands together until his knuckles turned white. Marissa entered moments later, flanked by two deputies. She wore a simple jail-issued blouse and pants, her hair tied back without care. Tears streaked her face before she even reached the defense table. She trembled violently, unable to stop. Observers murmured softly as she sobbed, wiping her cheeks with shaking fingers. Gone was the polished, confident woman who once strutted across Las Vegas like she owned it. Now she appeared frightened, fragile, and consumed by regret. The trial opened with the prosecutor presenting the traffic camera footage. The lights dimmed. The screen illuminated the courtroom. A hush fell over the audience as the footage played. Grant's vehicle appeared, pulling away from the cliff on the night Evelyn had been declared missing. Neither Grant nor Marissa looked distressed. They did not call for help. They did not panic. They simply drove away. The silence in the room was deep. The images spoke louder than any witness. When the clip ended, the prosecutor allowed the moment to settle before moving on. For several seconds, no one breathed. Next came the part everyone had waited for. Evelyn entered the courtroom. She walked slowly but steadily, her pregnancy visible beneath her simple dress. Her presence caused several spectators to cry openly. Many older viewers clutched tissues or pressed hands to their hearts. She did not look toward Grant or Marissa. She kept her gaze fixed forward as she approached the witness stand. When sworn in, she began her testimony. She described the night she was attacked. She explained how Marissa had approached her wheelchair with cold determination. She recalled the moment the chair rolled toward the edge. She described the sensation of falling, the rush of air, the fear that gripped her chest as she wondered whether her baby would survive. Her voice faltered several times, but she pushed forward. She spoke not only of pain, but of the will that had carried her through the ravine until Jonah found her. By the time she finished, many spectators were in tears. Even the judge paused, allowing the room to breathe before continuing. The defense attorney attempted to argue that Evelyn had fallen accidentally. He suggested she had misremembered events due to trauma. He implied that she had exaggerated her claims, but Evelyn remained calm. She reached into a folder and handed the prosecutor the critical evidence Patricia had uncovered. Records of a large confidential payment made by Grant on the night of the attempted murder. Emails referencing a solution, a transaction labeled Risk Management Services. The prosecutor displayed the documents on the screen. Gasps filled the room. Several spectators shouted. Bailiffs had to call for order. The judge rapped the gavel repeatedly, but the emotional shock was too great to contain. Grant lowered his head and began to cry. His shoulders shook as if a dam had broken. His attorney whispered urgently, but Grant seemed unable to hear him. The walls he had built around himself crumbled in front of the entire nation. Then Marissa broke. She stood suddenly, her voice shrill and panicked. She pointed at Grant and screamed, "He made me do it. He told me she needed to disappear. I only did what he asked." Her confession echoed across the courtroom. Reporters scrambled to record every word. The prosecutor responded firmly, stating that Marissa was the one who physically pushed Evelyn, and both would be held accountable. The jury needed little time to deliberate. When they returned, the foreperson stood with a sheet of paper that felt heavier than its weight. The courtroom fell silent as the verdicts were read. The jury found Marissa Lane guilty of first-degree attempted murder. They found Grant Hart guilty of conspiracy, premeditated orchestration of attempted murder, and deliberate obstruction of justice. The judge proceeded to sentencing immediately, given the overwhelming evidence. Marissa Lane is hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the judge declared. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into her chair, crying uncontrollably. Grant Hart is hereby sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, the judge continued. Grant closed his eyes as if the world had gone dark. He did not resist as deputies approached to take him away. When the proceedings ended, Evelyn rose from the witness stand. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were tears of release. The weight she had carried since that night on the cliff lifted from her shoulders. She walked toward the exit slowly, each step deliberate. Outside the courthouse, sunlight warmed her face. Spectators applauded. Some cried, some whispered blessings. Evelyn pressed a hand to her stomach, overwhelmed by emotion. Justice had spoken, and for the first time since she had fallen from that cliff, she felt free. The cabin greeted Evelyn with a warmth she had never felt so deeply before. After the final day of the trial, after the verdicts, after the sentencing, she stepped through the wooden doorway and felt the weight of the past months slide from her shoulders like a heavy coat she no longer needed to wear. The quiet of the forest wrapped around her, gentler than any words that could have been spoken. Jonah was waiting inside. The moment he saw her, he closed the distance between them and pulled her into an embrace. He held her as if welcoming someone who had returned from the edge of death. Evelyn clung to him. For the first time since the fall, she cried without fear or pain. She cried because her heart finally felt safe. She cried because justice had been served. She cried because she and her child had survived. Later that evening, as she rested on the couch, the television hummed softly from across the room. News stations replayed the moment she walked into the Las Vegas auditorium, her white dress, her steady steps, the room gasping in disbelief. Many anchors called it one of the most powerful moments of the decade. Evelyn watched quietly. Jonah sat nearby, listening without interrupting. Across the screen, commentators repeated a phrase that made Evelyn's breath catch. They called her a symbol of hope. Messages began arriving from across the country, especially from older viewers who felt moved by her courage. Letters arrived at the courthouse and were forwarded to Patricia, who handed them to Evelyn during her next visit. Most were written in neat cursive. Many included stories from elderly women who had endured hardship in their younger years. They praised Evelyn for standing her ground. They thanked her for showing the nation that strength could rise even from suffering. Evelyn read every letter slowly. Some made her cry again, some made her smile with aching tenderness. A few days later, Patricia visited the cabin, carrying a stack of legal documents inside a leather folder. She placed the papers on the table and explained that they provided long-term protection for Evelyn and her child. Restraining orders were formalized. Financial matters were secured. Evelyn's identity and rights were shielded from any future attempts by Grant's estate to interfere in her life. Patricia spoke with calm authority, ensuring Evelyn understood every detail. When the explanations ended, Patricia hugged her and said she was proud of her. Evelyn thanked her with genuine warmth. Patricia had become more than an attorney. She was now family. During this time, Jonah had quietly taken on another task. He fixed the small room at the end of the hallway, sanding the old wooden walls, repainting them, and installing a crib he built by hand. He added soft curtains, a small rocking chair, and shelves for blankets and toys. He said it was not perfect, but he wanted the baby to have a safe place to sleep. Evelyn stepped into the room and felt tears rise again. For the first time, the future felt close enough to touch. Her strength continued to grow. She walked outside more often, breathing in the crisp air and feeling the ground steady beneath her feet. When she visited her doctor for a routine checkup, the physician listened to the heartbeat of the child and smiled. The baby was strong and healthy. Evelyn closed her eyes with relief. The life inside her had survived every storm. One quiet afternoon, as golden light poured through the cabin windows, Evelyn felt a sudden tightening in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was another ordinary contraction, but when the tightening returned, deeper and more insistent, she knew it was time. She called Jonah's name. He rushed from the kitchen, his face turning pale as he realized what was happening. He grabbed the hospital bag Patricia had prepared and helped Evelyn into the truck. They drove down the forest road toward the small rural hospital. The wind rushed past the windows. Evelyn gripped Jonah's hand as the contractions grew stronger. He spoke to her softly, reminding her to breathe, reminding her that she was safe now. When they arrived, nurses met them at the entrance and guided Evelyn into a delivery room. Hours passed in a blur of effort and determination. Evelyn pushed with all the strength she had been building since the night she rose from the ravine. When the baby's cry finally filled the room, Evelyn felt her soul expand with a joy she had never known. The nurses placed her newborn daughter in her arms. The baby was pink, warm, and perfect. Her small fingers curled around Evelyn's thumb. Evelyn wept openly as she whispered the name she had chosen, Hope. The name felt like a promise, a reminder, a victory. Hope was the reason she held on when she thought she would die. Hope was the heartbeat that inspired her to rise again. Hope was now a living, breathing child who slept against her chest. Jonah stood beside the bed, tears running down his face. He had seen Evelyn climb out of darkness. Now he witnessed her step into the brightest part of her life. He touched Hope's tiny hand and whispered congratulations with a trembling voice. When they returned to the cabin days later, Patricia was waiting for them. She carried flowers and a small box. Inside was a silver pendant engraved with Hope's name and the date of her birth. Patricia asked if she could be Hope's godmother. Evelyn said yes with gratitude that filled her whole being. News of Hope's birth spread quickly through the nearby town. The community organized a small, welcoming gathering at the local lodge. People brought blankets, homemade food, and small gifts for the baby. Some hugged Evelyn. Some held her hands gently. Some simply smiled and said they were honored to meet her. The celebration was quiet, sweet, and deeply human. That evening, back at the cabin, Evelyn stepped outside with Hope in her arms. The sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The breeze was cool and carried the scent of pine. Evelyn looked at the horizon and felt peace settle into her heart. Her life had been returned to her. Her child was safe. Her future was her own again. She held Hope close and whispered a promise that the past would no longer define them. She knew the story that had nearly ended her life had finally closed. And now, with her daughter resting peacefully against her chest, she stepped into a new beginning.